What exactly happened behind the closed doors of that apartment is something we may never fully understand. But what we do know is that, on that night in February 2008, Anna's life would take a devastating turn. A normal father-daughter visit became the setting for a crime so horrific, it's impossible to comprehend the depths of betrayal. February 16, 2008. Anna's final visit to her father's apartment. For her, it likely started as any other. She was 14 years old, eager for the connection with her father, a chance to feel loved and understood. She arrived at the apartment, unsure that it would be her last visit, her last moment of innocence before a horrific tragedy would unfold. Miguel had been feeling the strain of his psychiatric issues for some time. That night, something set him off. Some reports suggest that Miguel found something disturbing in Anna's actions. A discovery on her computer. Anna had been writing sex things on a computer, an innocent exploration for a girl her age, trying to understand the complex world of relationships. But to Miguel, it was something much darker. A betrayal of some kind. It was a trigger. Something that set him off and led to his decision to strangle his daughter. What we know next is chilling. Miguel didn't just react in the heat of anger. No, he was methodical in his violence. Miguel reached for a bat, but it was the idea of blood that stopped him. Instead, he grabbed an electrical cord, tied a knot, and strangled his own daughter. He killed her. He choked her. And when she was gone, he didn't dispose of her body. He discarded her as if she were a piece of trash. The act was cold, calculated, and horrifying. But Miguel didn't stop there. Instead of calling for help, he decided to cover up his crime. His daughter's body was placed in the boiler of his apartment building, where it was partially burned. A desperate, twisted attempt to erase any trace of what he had done. But no matter how much he tried, the truth would come to light. Anna's body would not remain hidden, and neither would the darkness inside Miguel Matias. As we explore the mind of Miguel Matias, it's clear that he was a man on the edge. His entire life, filled with anger, frustration, and unresolved psychological trauma, had culminated in this moment of brutality. But what led him to take such a drastic, horrific step? Was it his mental instability? Was it the neglect and rejection he felt from the system? Or was it something even darker? That he simply felt entitled to control his daughter's every action, no matter the cost? We may never fully understand what drove him to kill, but what we do know is that Anna Matias, a young girl with so much promise, became a victim of a system that failed to protect her, and a father who, in his twisted mind, believed he had the right to take her life. This tragic story is just beginning, and we will continue to peel back the layers of this case. Stay with us as we move forward, as we uncover the aftermath of this crime, the investigation that followed, and the heartbreaking consequences for everyone involved. It started as just another visit. Anna, a young girl with a complex relationship with her father, walked into his Bronx apartment that evening, unaware of the darkness lurking behind her father's facade. Her life, filled with promise, was about to be tragically cut short. In the hours that followed, Miguel Matias would betray the trust of his daughter in the most unimaginable way. It was February 16, 2008, and the world as Anna knew it was about to end. Anna's visit to her father's apartment was like many others before it. On the outside, it seemed like an innocent, routine trip for a father and daughter to reconnect. But what Anna didn't know, what she could never have prepared for, was the explosion of violence that would erupt from the very man who was supposed to love and protect her. Miguel Matias, burdened by his past and mental health struggles, snapped. Reports indicate that he discovered something Anna had written on a computer. A few lines that he deemed inappropriate. Her attempt to explore the complexities of growing up became the catalyst for his madness. In his twisted mind, it was more than just innocent curiosity. To him, it felt like a betrayal, something that couldn't go unpunished. His perception of control, his warped sense of authority, led him down a dark and irreversible path. The violence didn't erupt suddenly. It was a cold, deliberate act. Miguel, disturbed by what he had found, became consumed with rage. But it wasn't just blind anger. Miguel's actions were methodical. He first reached for a bat, perhaps contemplating hitting Ana, but the sight of blood seemed to stop him in his tracks. That's when he made a chilling decision. He chose to strangle her instead. Miguel tied an electrical cord into a knot and used it to strangle his daughter. The image of a father choking his own child is unimaginable to most, but for Ana, it was a horrifying reality. As the air left her body, Ana's life was taken from her in the most brutal and final way. There was no mercy, no hesitation. The girl who was once so full of promise was gone. What followed was a sickening attempt to cover up his crime. Rather than seek help, rather than allow his daughter's death to be discovered immediately, Miguel decided to hide her body. His apartment building's boiler would become the place where he thought he could erase the evidence. He stuffed Ana's lifeless body into the boiler and partially burned it, trying to destroy any trace of the horrific crime he had committed. It wasn't just a murder. It was a twisted act of erasure. He didn't just take Ana's life. He tried to obliterate any sign that would lead back to him. In the aftermath of the murder, Miguel's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and panic. It was only hours later that he picked up the phone and dialed 911, making the call that would ultimately seal his fate. In a voice that was far too calm for the gravity of his actions, Miguel admitted to strangling his daughter. The call was haunting, filled with a chilling lack of remorse, almost as if the weight of what he had done hadn't fully hit him. "I strangled her. I choked her. I killed her," Miguel said in his confession. But that wasn't the end of his story. His attempt to mislead authorities began with the initial claim that he had dumped Ana's body in a wooded area of the Bronx, trying to distance himself from the crime scene. But as the hours passed and the police began their search, Miguel's lies began to unravel. His guilt became undeniable, and the truth was about to surface. When police arrived at the apartment building, they began their search for the body. Miguel's statement about the wooded area was quickly dismissed as the search unfolded. Instead of finding Ana's body where he said it would be, investigators discovered her remains hidden in the boiler. The sight of her body, partially burned and discarded, was an image that would forever haunt the officers who uncovered it. Miguel's attempt to erase the evidence was futile. The boiler had failed to completely destroy Ana's body, and the horrific crime scene left enough evidence to ensure the truth would eventually come to light. In the dimly lit basement, Miguel's cousin, Pablo Castillo, was one of the first to witness the body. His eyes locked onto the charred remains of his cousin's daughter, and the horror of what he saw left him unable to look any longer. The emotional impact of the discovery was overwhelming. Miguel had been institutionalized at one point after attempting to set a car on fire with his children inside. A desperate act that had, in a twisted way, mirrored the violence that would later unfold in his home. Yet, despite these clear signs of instability, he was allowed to maintain visitation rights with his children. There were whispers of his violent tendencies, but the system failed to intervene, allowing him to continue to have access to his children. What made him snap on that particular night? Was it the pressure of his failing mental health? Or was it the twisted sense of control he had over Ana that finally pushed him over the edge? What would drive a father, someone who was supposed to nurture and protect his child, to commit such an unspeakable act? Psychological experts would later examine Miguel's state of mind in the aftermath of the murder. Was he mentally fit to stand trial? Could he truly be held accountable for his actions? Or was he merely a product of his untreated mental illness? These questions would be debated in the courtroom, but the truth remained clear. Miguel Matias was a man who had lost all sense of humanity long before he took Ana's life. As the investigation progressed, a glaring question remained. How did this happen? How did Miguel Matias, with his history of violence and mental instability, still have access to his children? How did a system that was supposed to protect the innocent fail to intervene before this tragedy occurred? The answers were frustratingly simple. Despite multiple warning signs, Miguel had been allowed to continue visiting his children. He had been denied psychiatric help when he sought it, and there were no serious consequences for his earlier violent acts. The system failed Anna, failed to protect her from the very man who was supposed to be her protector. The failures of the legal and mental health systems would become a central part of the case. As the investigation unfolded, the deep cracks in the system were laid bare. How could this have been prevented? And how many other children are still vulnerable to similar horrors because the system fails to protect them? The public response to Anna's death was one of shock, outrage, and disbelief. The idea that a father could do this to his own daughter was almost too much for people to comprehend. Anna's tragic death became a national story, a reminder of the dangers of ignoring mental health issues, of failing to intervene when a child is at risk. The community that had once seen Miguel as a father figure was left shattered. How could they have known? How could they have seen the signs that, in retrospect, were so glaringly obvious? The residents of the Bronx, the family, and even the authorities were left grappling with the same painful question. How could this happen? As Anna's story spread, so did the calls for justice. There was a need for answers, and for Miguel to face the consequences of his actions. But with the murder came a deeper question that no one seemed to have an answer to. How could this have been stopped? To truly comprehend the horror of Miguel Matias's actions, it's crucial to delve into his psychological makeup. What drove a father to strangle his own daughter, then attempt to destroy her body? Was it a product of long-standing mental illness, a momentary lapse in control, or something even more chilling? A perverse belief that he had the right to take her life? Miguel's past provided disturbing insights into his mindset. He had a history of violent outbursts dating back to his early life, and as an adult, his anger issues were well documented. His attempt to set a car on fire with his children inside was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of reckless, destructive behavior. Yet, despite these violent tendencies, the system failed to intervene, allowing Miguel to maintain visitation rights with his children. This failure raises the question: could this tragedy have been avoided if there had been a deeper, more systematic response to his violence? Miguel had previously been institutionalized after his outburst with the car. His psychiatric issues were so severe that they required professional intervention. However, after his release, there were no significant measures taken to ensure he received the care he needed. This lack of proper treatment created a breeding ground for his eventual breakdown, a spiral into violent control that culminated in the murder of his daughter. His actions were not simply those of an angry father, but those of a man who had lost all grip on reality. Miguel's psychiatric history is one of escalating crises. From the outburst that led to his institutionalization to his plea for psychiatric help that was denied, his story highlights the grave consequences of neglecting mental health issues. The deeper layers of his troubled mind provide disturbing insights into why he felt entitled to control Anna in such an extreme way. Miguel's decision to murder Anna was not the result of a fit of rage, as is often the case in similar crimes. Instead, it was a cold and calculated act of violence. The use of an electrical cord to strangle his daughter was methodical, planned, and executed with a disturbing sense of control. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This was a man fully aware of what he was doing and choosing violence as a solution to a perceived problem. Anna's actions, writing things on a computer, were a triggering factor for Miguel, but they didn't justify the horror that followed. Miguel's control over Anna, from the way he treated her to the way he demanded obedience, suggests that he saw her not as a daughter, but as a possession. His rage was not simply about what she did. It was about her defiance, her autonomy. Miguel couldn't tolerate any form of rebellion, even if it was something as harmless as a young girl exploring the boundaries of her own identity. The act of strangling her, using the cord to ensure she couldn't escape, speaks to a complete absence of empathy. There was no sense of remorse as Anna fought for her life. He was determined to control the situation, determined to enforce his will on a defenseless child. His choice to kill her in such a way was deliberate. His words to the police would later reveal that, despite the brutality of his actions, he did not seem to fully grasp the moral weight of what he had done. Miguel's abuse was not just physical. It was psychological, driven by his need for control over his daughter. This was a man who believed that his authority as a father was absolute. To Miguel, Anna's defiance represented more than a simple act of rebellion. It was a challenge to his authority and a threat to his perceived power. This need for control was evident not just in the way he treated Anna, but in his previous interactions with his children. His violent tendencies and his utter disregard for their safety were part of a larger pattern of trying to dominate the people around him. Miguel's approach to parenting was authoritarian, but it was also manipulative. Anna may have been just 14, but the way Miguel treated her suggests he believed that her innocence was something to be controlled and shaped according to his desires. His violence was a tool to maintain that control. The deeper psychological issue here was not just a problem of anger or frustration. It was about Miguel's inability to accept any form of independence from his daughter. This dynamic mirrors many cases of familial violence, where the abuser is not just angry at the victim, but angry at their autonomy. They believe that their relationship is an extension of their control, and any attempt by the victim to break free is met with harsh retaliation. For Miguel, his own insecurities and mental instability fueled this toxic need for dominance. One of the most disturbing aspects of Miguel Matias's behavior was his ability to deny the gravity of his actions. When he called 911 to report Anna's death, his tone was chillingly detached, as if he were confessing to a lesser crime, not the brutal murder of his own child. The fact that he placed the blame on Anna's actions, suggesting that she had pushed him into a corner, reveals a dangerous self-deception. Miguel was incapable of taking full responsibility for what he had done. Instead, he rationalized his actions, twisting the narrative to fit his own distorted worldview. Miguel's self-deception wasn't just limited to his initial confession. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that he had convinced himself that his actions were justified, that he had no other choice but to kill Anna. The act of burning her body in the boiler was yet another way of removing himself from the reality of the crime. In his mind, by destroying the evidence, he was erasing the guilt. But the truth remained, and his denial only made his crime more incomprehensible. This denial is often present in cases of familial abuse, where the perpetrator sees themselves as the victim, not the aggressor. In Miguel's case, his sense of entitlement and control had grown so strong that he could not see the humanity in his daughter. He saw her only as a reflection of his own frustrations and insecurities, a tool for his own emotional release. This kind of self-deception is a hallmark of extreme violence, where the abuser is blind to their own culpability, convinced that their actions are either justified or out of their control. Miguel Matias's story is also a damning indictment of the mental health system, which failed to intervene despite clear signs of severe instability. From his history of violent outbursts to his unsuccessful attempts to seek psychiatric help, Miguel's case reveals the gaps in the system that allowed his anger to fester unchecked. Despite his violent behavior, he was allowed to maintain visitation rights with his children. Despite his institutionalization, there was no follow-up care or support to help him manage his mental health issues. Miguel's plea for psychiatric treatment was ignored, and his application for Medicaid was denied. This denial was a turning point. Had he received the care he needed, perhaps he wouldn't have spiraled into violence. The lack of mental health support ultimately led to a devastating chain of events, resulting in Anna's death. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the importance of accessible, long-term mental health care and the disastrous consequences of neglecting those who need it the most. Anna's death was not only a loss for her mother, Jocelyn, and her brothers, but also for a wider community that had witnessed the slow unraveling of a family. The impact of the murder on Anna's family was profound. The betrayal, the loss, and the confusion were overwhelming. For Anna's brothers, the trauma was unbearable. How could they process the fact that their father, the man who should have protected them, had taken the life of their sister? Anna's mother, Jocelyn, was left to grapple with the fact that her daughter's life had been stolen by someone who should have loved her the most. The aftermath of the crime would haunt her forever, a constant reminder of the brutality and betrayal she had witnessed. As the investigation into Miguel Matias' murder unfolded, the legal proceedings quickly became a focal point of public attention. The case was a chilling example of familial violence, but the legal road ahead would be far from straightforward. Miguel Matias, once arrested and charged with second-degree murder, was soon faced with the reality of the legal system. The public outcry following Anna's death was immense. People were outraged that a father could kill his own child in such a brutal, premeditated way. Many were demanding justice, and they wanted it fast. But what followed was a legal process that, while quick in some respects, was also filled with complexities. Miguel's defense attorneys were quick to offer a plea deal, one that would spare him from a lengthy trial in exchange for a guilty plea to second-degree murder. This plea deal quickly raised questions. Was this a fair resolution, or was it an easy out for a man who had committed an unspeakable crime? The plea deal meant that Miguel would not face the possibility of the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. Instead, he would face a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. For Anna's family, this was a bitter pill to swallow. Some wondered if justice was truly served, or if Miguel's mental health history had been used as a crutch to give him a lighter sentence. As the case continued, the plea deal became a subject of heated debate. Prosecutors felt the deal was necessary. Given the evidence against Miguel, they knew that this was not a case that could be easily won in court. His guilty plea ensured that he would face a lengthy prison sentence, and in the eyes of the legal team, this was the most practical outcome. However, for many, the plea deal felt like a missed opportunity to ensure that Miguel's full responsibility was acknowledged in court. Miguel Matias's defense team would later argue that his mental health played a significant role in the crime. His history of psychiatric instability, combined with the lack of proper treatment, was central to their defense strategy. They painted a picture of a man who had long struggled with emotional and psychological issues, but whose needs had been ignored by the system. They argued that Miguel's actions, while horrific, were the result of an untreated mental illness, one that clouded his judgment and led him to commit an unimaginable act. This defense was a crucial part of the legal battle. Experts were called to testify about Miguel's mental state, discussing his history of violence, his institutionalization, and the lack of care he received after his release. The defense also suggested that Miguel's mental health struggles, compounded by his sense of failure as a father and his inability to cope with his emotions, had led to a perfect storm that culminated in Anna's death. However, this argument was met with skepticism from many. While mental health issues are undoubtedly a serious concern, many felt that Miguel's actions went beyond the realm of mental illness. His methodical, calculated approach to murdering his daughter suggested a deep-rooted need for control, and his ability to lie to investigators and attempt to cover up his crime called into question the extent of his mental health struggles. Despite these doubts, the defense pushed forward with the argument that Miguel's history of mental illness and the lack of psychiatric support had led to the crime. The emotional toll of Anna's death on her family was immeasurable. For Jocelyn, Anna's mother, the loss of her daughter was compounded by the fact that her ex-husband was the one responsible for the crime. The grief was unbearable, but it was also filled with anger. Anger at Miguel for what he had done and anger at the system that failed to prevent the tragedy. Jocelyn was left to raise Anna's brothers, who also struggled with the brutal reality of their sister's death. The brothers, once close to their father, now had to come to terms with the fact that the man they once trusted was capable of such violence. The loss was a heavy burden for them, and the psychological scars would last a lifetime. As the case progressed, Jocelyn began to speak out, advocating for greater awareness of the mental health issues that had allowed Miguel to continue to have visitation rights despite his history of violence. She felt that the tragedy could have been prevented if only the system had acted sooner, if only there had been proper support in place for Miguel when he sought help. But for her, the damage was done, and nothing could bring Anna back. In the years following Anna's death, Jocelyn worked to ensure that her daughter's story would not be forgotten. She spoke publicly about the failure of the mental health system, the importance of protecting children, and the need for reform in family courts. It was a painful journey, but one that kept Anna's memory alive. The pain of losing her daughter never truly subsided. But Jocelyn was determined to use Anna's story to raise awareness and make sure that other children were not lost in the same way. The public's reaction to Anna's murder and the subsequent legal proceedings was one of anger and disbelief. For many, the plea deal was seen as a way for Miguel to avoid the full consequences of his actions. People questioned whether the justice system had failed Anna, and whether the lack of a trial meant that Miguel would never truly be held accountable for the full extent of his crime. The case quickly became a rallying cry for those who believed that children's safety should be a top priority. Anna's tragic death brought attention to the flaws in the system, highlighting the dangers of neglecting mental health issues and the lack of proper support for families struggling with violence and psychological instability. Public protests and online campaigns began to demand justice not just for Anna, but for all victims of familial violence who had been failed by the very systems that were supposed to protect them. For the public, the case represented a larger issue: the failure of institutions to intervene when abuse was present. It became a wake-up call to the need for stronger child protection laws and more accessible mental health care. And for Anna's story, it meant that her death would not go unacknowledged. Ultimately, Miguel Matias was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder. The sentencing was a bittersweet moment for Anna's family. While they had hoped for justice, the reality of the sentence was less satisfying than they had imagined. No amount of time behind bars could bring Anna back, and the family knew that Miguel would eventually leave prison, something that was difficult to accept. For many, the sentence was a reminder of the complicated nature of justice. The plea deal had spared Miguel from a lengthy trial, but it also ensured that he would spend a significant amount of time behind bars. Whether or not that was enough justice for Anna's life was a question that lingered long after the verdict was read. As the legal process concluded, the focus shifted to healing. For Jocelyn and her children, the fight was far from over. They had lost a beloved daughter, a sister, and a friend. Their lives would never be the same. But they found strength in telling Anna's story and working toward a future where no child would have to face the horrors Anna had endured. As Anna's story reverberates through the corridors of justice and society, the fundamental question remains: could this horrific tragedy have been prevented? When we look back on the details leading up to Anna's death, it's clear that there were signs, warning signals that were either ignored or not acted upon with enough urgency. From Miguel's violent past to his untreated mental health issues, there were numerous moments where intervention could have disrupted the tragic chain of events. Miguel's attempt to set a car on fire with his children inside was a glaring red flag, but it was dismissed as an isolated incident at the time. Had authorities or mental health professionals acted more decisively, perhaps this escalation wouldn't have occurred. But in the absence of swift intervention, Miguel's downward spiral was allowed to continue unchecked, and Anna's life was the price. This case highlights the vulnerability of children caught in dysfunctional family dynamics, particularly when one of the parents has a history of violence and instability. The system failed to step in, and Anna paid the ultimate price for that failure. Could she have been saved? Could she have had the chance to grow up, untainted by this terrible fate? These are questions that linger long after the courtroom drama has ended. Questions that remain unanswered and forever etched into the hearts of those who loved her. Miguel's own cousin was exposed to the harsh reality of the crime his family had suffered. The grief was immeasurable, not just for Pablo, but for everyone who would soon learn of the tragedy. When news of Anna's death began to spread, the public was left reeling. How could a father do something so unimaginable to his own child? The news left a community in shock, as those who knew Miguel and Anna were left questioning the reality of the situation. Miguel Matias, who had once seemed like the typical father figure, was now revealed to be a monster, a man capable of taking the life of the very daughter he was supposed to love and protect. Miguel's attempt to hide his crime by placing Anna's body in the boiler was a desperate measure, but it failed to shield him from the weight of his actions. The shockwaves of the murder were felt not just by Anna's immediate family, but by the wider community, who struggled to come to terms with the horrific reality of what had happened behind closed doors. As the details of the murder emerged, one thing became painfully clear. This was not a random act of violence, but the culmination of years of psychological issues, violence, and a man who had become unhinged by his own mental state. The system had failed to intervene, and now, an innocent young girl had paid the ultimate price. As the investigation continued, even darker details of the crime began to unfold. DNA tests revealed that Miguel Matias was not only the father of Anna, but he had also impregnated her. The revelation sent shockwaves through the already fractured case. The man who had murdered his daughter had also violated her in the most unimaginable way. This discovery added a new layer of horror to the case. How could this have been allowed to happen? How could a system that was supposed to protect children have failed Anna so completely? The revelation of sexual assault on top of the murder was a devastating blow to the family and the community. This was no longer just a tragic murder. It was a story of unimaginable betrayal, exploitation, and the utter failure of the systems that should have protected Anna from the very beginning. For Anna's family, the revelation of her father's actions was almost too much to bear. Jocelyn, Anna's mother, was devastated. To lose a child in any way is unimaginable, but to lose her in such a brutal, unthinkable way at the hands of the man who should have been her protector was a pain beyond words. Anna's brothers, too, were left to grapple with the loss of their sister, their own confusion and grief compounded by the betrayal of their father. How could they ever understand this kind of violence? This brings us to a larger question. How do we balance the rights of parents with the safety of children? Where does the legal system draw the line between a parent's right to see their child and the necessity of protecting a child from harm? The legal failure to act in Anna's case exposes serious flaws in family law, particularly when it comes to protecting vulnerable children from potential harm. Anna's murder did not only impact her immediate family, it sent shockwaves through the community, touching everyone who knew her. The people who had witnessed Anna's relationship with her father, who had seen him in the community as a seemingly normal man, were left grappling with disbelief. How could someone so close to them commit such a brutal crime? How could a father kill his daughter in such a calculated way? The ripple effect of this crime was felt deeply, especially in the Bronx, where the murder occurred. Neighbors who had trusted Miguel, who had seen him as a well-meaning father, were left questioning everything they thought they knew about him. The reality of familial violence, particularly when it occurs behind closed doors, is difficult to comprehend. And it is often only after a tragedy like this that people begin to realize the signs that were missed. But even within this community's grief, there was a glimmer of hope. Anna's story became a catalyst for raising awareness about the importance of mental health care, child protection, and the need for systemic reform. While Anna's death was a tragedy, it sparked important conversations about how families, communities, and the legal system must work together to prevent similar events from occurring in the future. In the wake of Anna's death, her mother, Jocelyn, became an advocate for change. She took it upon herself to raise awareness about the dangers of familial violence, particularly in situations where mental health is a contributing factor. Jocelyn's personal journey of loss and grief transformed into a mission to ensure that other families didn't have to endure the same fate. Jocelyn's advocacy has been instrumental in shedding light on the flaws in the mental health system and the legal framework that allows abusive parents to maintain access to their children. She has spoken publicly about her experience, calling for more robust mental health care, improved child protection services, and a more rigorous legal system that ensures parents with violent tendencies are not permitted to endanger their children. While Jocelyn's fight is ongoing, it serves as a reminder of the power of one person's voice in driving systemic change. By sharing Anna's story, she hopes to inspire others to act, to recognize the warning signs of abuse, and to intervene before it's too late. Anna's death, though tragic, is not without purpose if it leads to a world where children are truly safe from harm. Despite the horror of her death, Miguel Matias' legacy is one of resilience and hope. Her story will not be forgotten, and in the years to come, her life will be remembered as a reminder of the importance of family protection and mental health care. Anna was a bright, promising young girl, and though her life was cut short, her memory will continue to inspire others to fight for justice and change. In communities, schools, and family courts, the lessons learned from Anna's tragic death will be passed on. Her name has become a symbol of the need for reform in child protection, a beacon of hope for children everywhere who are at risk. Her legacy is a call to action, to prevent future tragedies, to ensure that children are given the chance to grow up safely and with love, and to protect the most vulnerable members of society. As we wrap up Miguel Matias' tragic story, we can't help but reflect on the harsh reality that too many children suffer in silence, just like Anna did. Anna's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a failure of society, a failure to recognize the signs of danger, a failure to address mental health issues before they escalate, and a failure to protect the most vulnerable among us, our children. If Anna's story has touched you, if it has left a mark on your heart, then it's time to take action. This is more than just a documentary. It's a call to action, a plea for everyone who watches this to stand up and advocate for the change we desperately need in our systems, in our communities, and in our approach to mental health and child protection. Every day, children are exposed to unimaginable horrors, sometimes at the hands of those they trust the most. And often, these children don't have a voice to speak up. But we do. You do. And that's why it's so important that you don't turn away from this issue. This is a cause that demands our attention. The more we talk about it, the more awareness we raise, the greater the chance we have to protect other children from experiencing the same fate as Anna. What can you do? It starts with awareness. It starts with education. If you see warning signs, be it in a child's behavior or in a family dynamic, speak up. It's easy to dismiss things as none of our business, or it's just a family issue. But that's the mentality that allows abuse to continue in the shadows. You help spread the message that change is necessary, that we can't afford to ignore the signs of abuse and neglect. No child should live in fear. No child should be forced to endure the kind of violence Anna suffered. And yet, so many children are, because we as a society don't act swiftly enough to protect them. It's time to break that cycle. It's time for us to be the change that is needed. If Anna's story has shaken you, if you believe that her death should be a catalyst for change, then it's essential to stay informed and continue learning about these issues. Subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories, but also for ongoing discussions about how we can make a difference. We will continue to shine a light on cases that need attention, on systemic failures that need reform, and on the voices that need to be heard. Subscribing means you'll stay updated on critical stories, true crime investigations, and advocacy efforts that can help protect future generations from suffering the same fate as Anna. It means you're part of a growing movement that seeks justice, awareness, and ultimately change. Your subscription isn't just about keeping up with these stories. It's about staying committed to making the world a safer place for children. But if you aren't ready to subscribe yet, that's okay. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share why you feel moved by Anna's story. What can we do together to prevent more families from experiencing what Anna's family endured? What steps can we take as a community to protect vulnerable children from harm? Your voice matters, and your opinion is invaluable. This is your chance. This is your call to make a difference. You can't sit on the sidelines and hope that things will change. Change begins with you. Change begins with your action. And it begins now. Take a moment to subscribe, share, and engage in this important conversation. We all owe it to Miguel Matias to ensure her death was not in vain. We owe it to her to ensure that the systems meant to protect children are improved, that mental health care is accessible to those in need, and that no more children